Due to the rapid increase in population across the world, it is important that we, as architects, propose solutions to improve the quality and living standards of human beings. It is also important that the solutions respect nature and all other living species. We believe this could only be achieved by designing quality habitable environments that exemplifies a balance between man-made structures and the surrounding biodiversity. Throughout this semester, we explored certain architectural possibilities with voxelized agent fields across different terrains. Many of these experiments were conducted with the use of Mars landscape dunes as the foundational basis. These topographies allowed us to explore various conditions that could be adapted towards our design advantage. With a variety of simulations that populates programmed agents across these topographies, we tried relating them to architecture by voxelizing the said agent fields. These are some of the results that were acquired during the process. These results have various qualities. Linear levels of hierarchy. Broad or widespread plateaus. Dispersing narrow strands. Isolated strands. Convergence of elements. Fields of pools or pockets. With particular qualities that are suitable for high-density and high-quality architectural designs, we proceeded towards applying the experimentations to an identified site in Patrangia, Croatia. As mentioned, the site is in Patrangia, Croatia. It is within the proximity of the Patrangia city center. The site boundary has been highlighted in yellow. The nearest main road is highlighted in red dashed lines and the nearest branch of the Kupar River has been highlighted in blue. As you can see, the topographical setting of Patrangia indicates that the area that we have selected as our site is approximately 106 meters above sea level, and the surrounding area towards the southeast of the site gain higher elevations that are as high as 400 meters above sea level. The diagram below indicates the tree cover gain and tree cover loss during the period from the year 2001 to year 2020. The chosen site, which has been highlighted in yellow, has an area of 0.66 square kilometers. The area that has been subjected to comparison is a residential area across the river that has been highlighted in red. The area is 0.56 square kilometers. These residential buildings are comparatively lower in terms of density and occupies a similar area compared to the site that would portray the proposed architectural project. The city center is approximately 1.5 kilometers to the northeast. There are also establishments related to healthcare, administration, education, and businesses within the same proximity. The site is comparatively flatter and allows views towards the city and the surrounding mountains. Due to the strategic positioning, we believe it is a suitable location for a new possible development. We would also like to present a bit of background context to the reason for site selection. In 2020 there was an earthquake in Patrangia with a magnitude of 6.4. This diagram indicates how the surrounding areas were affected. Some of the surrounding countries that were affected by the earthquake are also portrayed in the diagram. What is important note is that a population of 71,000 was exposed to the disaster from Patrangia and the surrounding cities. You could also see how the previously described low-density existing architecture was affected across the city with the included images. Based on a conducted SWOT analysis, it is identifiable that the city of Patrangia could benefit from many aspects. These include cultural and historical value of the city, availability of small business and entrepreneurial opportunities, geographical location that would enable the city to be rebuilt as a smart city, and attracting tourists. The rest of the information describes the population and the main economic structure of Patrangia. These are some of the few reasons why we believe in naming our project as City of Proximities. The focus on the project could be fivefold. Proximity, diversity, quality of community, ubiquity, and density would be prioritized. These would create a basis towards a 15-minute city that would focus on the overall accessibility that runs through the entirety of the region, and the allocation of programs based on solar analysis, area, subdivision as well as unification. The idea of such a design is to create larger central areas as communal spatial arrangements, enrich the biodiversity of the urban environment while creating a hybrid between the landscape and built-up area. We believe it is also important to strategically allocate programs. These are some of the initial explorations that were carried out to identify suitable chunk designs that create an ideal combination within the existing topography of the site while respecting the nature. These are some of the close-up conditions that we identified during the initial stages. Based on the initial explorations, we proceeded with further developments on the chunks while creating a series of interstitial spaces that would create an overall networking pathway through the field. Some of the cascading views have been highlighted in yellow while the gray dashed lines indicate a potential pathway creation through the interstitial spaces. Based on the explorations, we believe that there should be a combination of lower levels and denser levels in each of the chunks that could potentially be allocated towards functions such as co-living areas. Areas highlighted in green portray the possible landscape conditions. Following images indicate the chunks as an overview. And these are some of the close-up moments that we identified on the chunks that create the same characteristics that were identified across the initial explorations. The following are the chunks in plan and elevation views indicating the spread of the architectural fields. The use of mass timber structures to build natural force-resilient structures has been an ancient practice. We adopted some of these methodologies in order to propose some components that would create a series of interlocking combinatorics, which could possibly become a solution towards natural disasters such as earthquakes. In order to do so, we looked into these particular components that have various angular qualities, differences in levels and glazing that are capable of being reconfigured to form an array of habitable spatial qualities. These are the primary components that are used repeatedly across the architectural tectonics. The following are the sections of the components. The four components are capable of producing numerous combinations. Improvements can be made by manually dismantling the internal elements such as walls and glazing to generate dissimilar volumes that could ultimately form larger habitable spaces to contribute towards the 15-minute city idea. This particular series of images indicate such combinations that could be formed by the use of the initially formed four components. Components have been listed based on the possibilities and each variation has been identified across them. The following series of images indicate the possible outcomes based on the interlocking of two components, under generative rotations and directionalities. It is paramount to identify that the glazing has a substantial value when forming the ideal spatial arrangements as they could be oriented towards the exterior or the interior to create private, public, and semi-private spaces that would designate programs and functions. These are some of the larger iterations that could be formed under different compositions. This is an overview of the entire field of populated components that portrays how the architecture could coexist with the existing nature. The configurations of the said combinatorics of the components as architectural tectonics produced an outcome that was applicable in the identified voxel chunks that were portrayed in the previous experimentation scenarios. Some of these exterior views identify how the components could be strategically placed through the fields to form various heights that could function as enclosed areas as well as open areas. It is also important to note that there are smaller fragmented compositions that have been formed by the components that could ideally be used as habitable spaces such as single living studio units or co-working spaces. Based on the usage and the functionality, they could also be allocated as commercial spaces, areas with internal vegetation and utility areas. The cascading arrangement of the components are capable of forming various moments that are absorbing in terms of internal spatial qualities. We believe that these arrangements could form internal courtyards, double volume spaces including atriums and single volume spaces, that could potentially attract the younger entrepreneurs and small business owners. It is also a reasonable assumption that the spaces could be allocated towards various targeted audiences such as working expatriates, nuclear families, and aged population from the area. The spaces indicated on the sectional perspective outlines the variances between light and shadow plays, and the natural ventilation which forms a balance between enclosed and open areas. The hierarchical arrangements necessarily create a basis towards privacy and the security of the spatial planning. This is an isolated selection, which portrays the interior qualities through a plan view. The unification and the subdivision of areas based on spatial availability has been applied throughout the entire space. Similar conditions that were identified via the sectional perspective could be identified across the plan. The view indicates how public spaces such as internal courtyards, and transition spaces for overall pathways have been allocated. Furthermore, reservations towards residential units have been allocated with areas that are on upper floors, which are secluded from public spaces. CO living and CO working spaces have been identified within the surrounding of the overall public courtyard space. The following are some of the interior views that were captured in order to portray the various spatial qualities. The identified architectural moments through the proposed design and the characteristics that relate towards the entire habitat across a larger area with solid architectural tectonics could potentially reinforce the idea of helping a city strive towards rebuilding. The primary focus of the project was to associate a smaller township with ideologies that would create a better future for the residents while improving the overall quality of life. We strongly believe that creating a coexistence between architecture and nature would become a huge leap forward as it ensures a sustainable future.